All right, 16 does not have a line reference, but 17 does. This is an evidence pair, so we're going to do them together. The first thing that I notice as I start this is 16 is really, really confusing. The discussion of the experiments suggests that people are inclined to think of specific information sources in response to being something. They're thinking of an information source. What is that? I don't understand what that means. But that's okay. That's part of this process is we have to trust that as we go through the question, we're going to learn more. As we read the line references, as we look at the choices, you don't always need to understand everything 100% immediately. Trust that it will reveal itself as more words and ideas start to match as you do more of the question. So right now, I think that what matters is this idea that people are inclined to think of specific information sources, right? And then there's this other piece like in response. So I want to look for where they're talking about them thinking of specific information sources. That's the Q part of the QLC method is understanding what we want out of the line references. So now let's go to these and see what we can figure out here. So 42 to 45, 42 to 45, line reference A. In the first experiment, participants demonstrated that they were more likely to think of computer terms like Yahoo or Google after being asked a set of difficult trivia questions. That has a lot of matches with the question. So first of all, what they were more inclined to think of seems to match very nicely with being inclined to think here, right? Like more likely to, oh, see, I switched the words without even noticing it. More likely to think of something is pretty much a dead-on match for inclined to think something, right? So not the same exact words, but pretty darn close. I guess this is where I'm doing some guessing. Information sources? Well, just from my own knowledge, I know that Yahoo and Google are search engines, so those would be sources of information, I guess. Like if I have a question, I Google something. I don't Yahoo it, but I Google it, and I get an answer. But I don't love that I'm doing that. Like, I shouldn't have to know stuff in order to be able to match it with the question. That's very, very uncommon. So that makes me nervous. But it does match in a way. So there's a lot going for this choice. And especially now that they're also talking about a response, we kind of have that. It's in response to being asked a set of difficult trivia questions. So notice, I understand the question better than I did 30 seconds ago. And it's because this line reference kind of showed me what to care about. Now, I'm not convinced that line reference A is right. I just like that there's a lot of matches, and it at least gets me a better understanding of the question. But the key to these evidence pairs is not to just go with your favorite thing right off the bat. You gotta just be cautious here. Sometimes they're trapping us, so we have to always act as if we're being trapped. Sometimes we won't be trapped. Sometimes they're not tricking us. But we don't really know, because when they are tricking us, it feels the same way. So we have to always be cautious, like we're about to get tricked into some answer choice, and go through the process rigorously, not cut any corners. That way we don't fall for the trap if it's there, and we still get the answer right if it's not there. So let's look at line reference B, 48 to 51. Okay, that's this line. Half the subjects were told that their work would be saved to a computer. The other half were informed that the statements would be erased. Oh, okay, well that's nonsense. That has nothing to do with what people are inclined to think. That is a description of the experiment. In other places, I've sometimes called this a what choice. It describes something in the question without actually answering the question, right? It's describing the experiments. It is itself a discussion of the experiments without answering the thing that we care about the experiments. So that's no good. 51 to 53. Let's keep going. That is here to here. In subsequent memory testing, participants who were told their work would not be saved were best at recalling the statements. Okay, well, there's some stuff there. So in response, right, so in response to being maybe told their work would not be saved, and they're recalling statements, so they're maybe like inclined to think about the statements. I don't see anything about information sources, but this one also has some checks, right? So it's good enough that I should keep it. I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's better than A, but it's related enough, so we have to keep it. And then let's look at D, 59 to 61. Nope. Keep that red. The participants proved better able to recall the folder locations than the statements themselves. So this kind of has something about, being able to recall stuff that's kind of like inclined to think of something. But there's no stimulus, right? They're not doing that in response to something. And again, maybe this is about the folders. Maybe there are information sources, which is the folders. So I don't know. Okay. Well, maybe I keep that one in too. 3 choices on a hard question that are still possible. That's pretty normal. You shouldn't be scared about that. That's part of this process. It's okay. We're now going to try to understand those choices better by looking at the rest of number 16. So let's go to those. So people are inclined to think of specific information sources in response to being required to memorize details that will then be made inaccessible. Well, just from an SAT perspective, things like required is kind of a strong word that bothers me. So it's really strict, right? Required to memorize details that will then be made inaccessible. So if they were told their work would not be saved, this kind of sounds like C. Line reference C maybe matches with that. I don't know. The thing is that that's the one that didn't have any information sources. So it kind of matches again, but it's not a home run. So we're going to keep going. B, they're directed to develop a system for organizing and saving content. Well, I definitely don't remember anything about organizing. Also, they're not really developing the system, right? In all these places, it seems like they're saving things to a folder, maybe. This one feels more wrong. I don't really think organizing was a big emphasis in any of these line references. They're recalling things, they're remembering things, but organization maybe is in some of these in-between lines, but it's not in the ones that we're supposed to care about. So I don't like that choice. C, asked to provide facts that are not already familiar to them. Okay. Well, I guess maybe if they're trivia questions, then maybe they're not familiar to them. So that might seem like it works. And that does have the information sources. Like again, I can make it fit. So maybe this matches with line reference A. Let's look at D. Prompted to identify terms related to dependence on computers. No, they're definitely not that, because dependence is a strong word. Plus, they're not being told that they're dependent on computers. That's not part of this at all. That's way too strong, not part of the experiment. So this happens sometimes as well, where we have a pair or 2 pairs that we are kind of considering, and we have to think like, well, one of the pairs must be better. So what we can do is we can kind of do what I did with all these different colors, is think about different matches and see which one has more matches. Purely from an SAT standpoint, I would pick C here and then line reference A, because I like that there are fewer strong words. A, that word required, the word inaccessible. These words scare me. It's not just based on this passage, it's just based on my knowledge of the SAT that really strong words tend to be wrong. So if I'm like 50-50 between these choices, I'm going to go with choice C because it has fewer words that scare me like that. And look, that's not a great way to answer a question. I'd rather know for sure what the right answer is. But realistically, if you're running out of time, if you're just stuck on a question, you don't want to waste more time on it, you got to pick something and you have to have a reason. And sometimes the SAT provides reasons that the passage doesn't. And that's why we follow the chronology rule. That's why we look for strong words. Sometimes we just need a little bit of a nudge into a certain direction. And I could always circle this and be like, all right, I'll come back to this if I have more time and try to really find the real reason. And that's okay. I do that on my actual test. That's a fine thing to do. But for now, I've got an answer down and it's bubbled. And at the very least, if I do run out of time, I've got something on the page that I can have a little bit of confidence in. And C and A are the correct answers here. And the reason is that those sources of information that they mention in the question are the Yahoo and Google that they mention in the line reference. I don't love that I have to provide that, but I guess the SAT in this case is saying, well, everyone knows what Yahoo and Google are. It's just like a vocab word at this point that everyone should know. So those are sources of information, and people are inclined to think of Yahoo and Google when they are presented with facts that they don't know, right? When they're asked difficult trivia questions, well, what are they going to do? They're going to Google the answers to those trivia questions. So they're not thinking of the actual answer to the trivia question. They're thinking of where they might find that answer. Google. It's a bit of a stretch, yeah. But sometimes there's 2, 3, 4 hard questions in the SAT where you're going to have to stretch it a little bit, and it's still provable. I have no doubt that that's the answer. The SAT didn't mess up here. Those are the answers. It's in the lines. It's just that I had to do a little bit more work than usual to make sure everything fit. And the reason is that the question has got a lot of pieces, right? The choices have a lot of pieces. The science is hard to understand. So I had to sort through more information than I'm used to, and so it felt like I was less certain at the end. That is not going to go away. I've been taking SATs for 15 years. I still, on 2 to 3 reading passages, 2 to 3 reading questions, have these moments where I'm like, well, it could kind of go either way. I could see it both ways. This one has a little bit more likelihood of being right. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm going to pick it. And most of the time I'm right. Occasionally I get it wrong, but most of the time is good enough for the points, most of the time, and 780 versus 800, who cares at that point? So, a lot of stuff going on in this question. You can work your way to get it right, but you're going to need to be very confident in what the SAT is doing and in what you're doing. So you need a strong process, and the QLC method provides one.